Do we have people on the line here, Arthur?
They're all in the waiting room. Here they are.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
Here we go. Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're broadcasting live from Park City, Utah, and Kelly is in beloved Brooklyn. And so thank you for taking some time from your afternoon here and sharing it with us. I see Jason's on. Big shout out to Jason Rifkin, who I've known for many, many years, and he's been a big fan of ours, and we're a big fan of his. And so thank you, Jason, for arranging this. It's all your fault. So, and we welcome it. The format today, as you know, we can't hear or see you, but we encourage and welcome your questions as they come to mind. Please be sure to post them in the Q&A or the chat box. We have a lot of people coming on today, and we'll get to as many as possible. As we go through the presentation, and also keep in mind, if there are others that you think would benefit from hearing what you hear today, it'll be recorded and posted on the Family Office Insights YouTube channel, if that's okay with Kelly, and preferably posting it somewhere where they can come and see more about you. So in any event, you'll be able to connect directly with Kelly and his team to discuss it further. As you know, we totally stay out of the way. We want to make sure that you can glean the information you want, not only from this presentation, but post-presentation directly from Kelly and his folks. So feel free to do that. Again, please be sure, as you have questions that come to mind, post them so we can get to as many as possible. We have about an hour today, and Kelly, we're going to do this again in a week or so. So just also be mindful, if there's others that would enjoy this, you'll be notified that we're going to be doing a second presentation for Fisher Wallace Labs. Fortunately, I'm not a candidate for the device. I'm seldom depressed. But I know a lot of people are, and there's more to this than depression, of course. So with that, thank you again for being here. Kelly, take it away.
Thank you, Arthur. Appreciate it. Hello, Jason. I can't see you, but I'm glad you're on. Yeah, I actually have been a patient, and I did need it. I did have depression in my 20s, and I tried medication, Wellbutrin, Zoloft, and I didn't get a lot of benefit from it, but I did get side effects from it. In my case, it was always feeling hungry and not, even if I'd eaten a meal, gained weight, had trouble with dreams, some strange dreams I had on those medications. So I met my co-founder, Chip Fisher, after he bought this technology and started using it, and it helped me quite a bit. So I was hooked. And so then, this is now almost 14 years later, since we first met. So I'm Kelly Robin, co-founder, CEO. Chip Fisher is not on today. He was the original founder. He doesn't have a day-to-day operations role anymore, but he's put in, he was our angel investor and acquired the original IP. We have new IP now, but he acquired the original IP. I think before I get into the technology, I'll just start with some statistics on the biggest problem we're solving is depression. The stats are kind of interesting to look at over the last couple of years, because it spiked a lot during COVID and then it's come down somewhat. And so depending on what year you're looking at recently, it could be more than a third, but roughly a third adults have clinical depression. And I think a signal of that is that every year there are more than 1 million emergency department visits with suicidal ideation. Most of those emergency room visits are teenage girls. It's the highest demographic prevalence in teenage girls. When it comes to suicide, it is men 3 times as often as women. And then when you look at treatment, twice as many women are treated than men in the US. And so in that case, the correlation between, much higher rate of suicide in men and a much lower treatment rate is sad and interesting to note. Roughly a third of adults with major depressive disorder are not receiving treatment. And the costs to society and the cost of treatment are very large, 70 billion at least spent a year treating major depressive disorder, hundreds of billions when you include everything from lost productivity, absenteeism. So huge problem. We're all aware this is a huge problem. A couple of more facts. We don't just treat depression with our technology. We also treat anxiety and insomnia, which are comorbid conditions with depression much of the time, especially anxiety. Over 70 million Americans have insomnia, chronic sleep deprivation, as it's also called. And Europe it reports a bit less of a prevalence, but still very high. And, the economic costs between Europe and the US, which are the 2 markets that we are focusing on, they're staggering costs and prevalence. What is already out there treating depression as well as anxiety, insomnia? Obviously, medication and behavioral therapy. Those are the standards of care. The common problem with both of those is how long they take to work, with the exception of esketamine, which is a synthetic form of ketamine. Antidepressant medication is slow acting, can take 8 weeks, 12 weeks to work, and behavioral therapy is the same. And the problem with slow acting treatments is that people will turn to other things, alcohol, recreational drugs, to get rapid relief. And if they're not feeling the effects of a medication, they will simply stop taking it. A third of patients stop taking antidepressants in the first month. We're also all aware of the side effects, as I was speaking of when I started, and there are many worse side effects than that. It's very common, 38% side effect rate with SSRIs. And the poor adherence I already spoke to. People are reluctant to keep taking them if they don't work or if they start feeling side effects. Cognitive behavioral therapy, it doesn't have side effects, but it requires homework. So, in order to really get the benefits from it, you have to put in the work, and that level of engagement is challenging for a lot of patients. With insomnia, there's a lot of similarities there. CBT, again, it's just a lot of people don't stick with it, and the efficacy of CBT, although it's considered the gold standard, still leaves a lot of patients out with effectiveness, and the meds can be problematic if you're taking Ambien for years. And we've worked with many veterans, including Navy SEALs, who literally took Ambien every day for a decade. And when they left the military, they're looking for something else to help them sleep when they don't have to work at night all the time.
So Kelly, mind if I jump in here for 1 second?
Please, yeah.
The incumbent standards of care.
Yeah.
We know the pharmaceutical stuff, but the consultation with a therapist, are they a barrier as far as you can tell to this type of therapy that you're bringing into a device? Or are they, in other words, people often try to protect their turf, right? And so are you finding that they're embracing this, or are they pushing back?
Both. There is turf protection in this field. There's no question. I would say the one thing I didn't mention is transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is an in-clinic form of brain stimulation. We do, you can see here on the bottom, wearable. This is our proof of concept device, version 1, wearable brain stimulation. But TMS is an in-clinic form of it. administered by a doctor, much more expensive, covered by Medicare, and a lot of, I would say there's a lot of business model vulnerability if you can introduce a wearable that may remove the need for that in-clinic form of treatment. Insurance providers would rather pay a few $100s for a wearable than thousands of dollars for an in-clinic procedure. And the other side is that there are psychiatrists who are agnostic about interventions and who don't use TMS as a business model, don't depend on it for a living, and just want the best thing for the patient. So we have psychiatrists that prescribe our device to TMS patients and ECT patients as a maintenance therapy. In terms of big pharma, I think, I mean, the days of the in-patent medications are mostly over. It's mostly a generic competitors. They're still large companies, but it's different than if we were, I think, going up against the blockbuster drugs in their heyday. And cognitive behavioral therapy, talking to therapists, there's a lot of crossover we see with our patients who are, you know, we actually plan to offer cognitive behavioral therapy in our app, which I'll get to. So
yeah, good. Well, that's good to hear that there's not like a brick wall, right?
It's not a brick wall. No, there's different battles depending on the, you know, on the treatment.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So in terms of depression, which is I'm going to focus on, even though we are done quite a bit of work on anxiety, insomnia, which I'll touch on, but we've done the most work in depression, and the most effective treatment for major depressive disorder is electroconvulsive therapy. People think of as shock therapy. Over 70% response rate, works very rapidly. It's also very expensive, like TMS. It's expensive. You need anesthesia. They don't give it to you as you're biting down on something. You have anesthesia and you receive the treatment, and it has saved a lot of lives. It's an important treatment, often used if patients are suicidal. So kind of the technological challenges we looked at it was, how do we take something as effective as that and put it in a wearable form that's near zero risk, that's comfortable, that can be self-administered, and by the fact of that, it's going to be inexpensive, affordable out of pocket. We would like to be able to have patients obtain treatment without insurance, for the most part. So the original engineers, Saul and Bernard List, developed this version 1 device, as you can see on the bottom, that is a low dose, twice daily delivery of transcranial alternating current stimulation, which is what ECT is. It's transcranial alternating current stimulation. ECT is just at a very high dose. One of the innovations that they had is the carrier frequency. There's a frequency package that the version 1 used, and a pulsed square waveform, which even today you don't see square waveforms in brain stimulation devices. You tend to see sinusoidal waveform. So very unique treatment, and developed by a couple electrical engineers. Since then, there has been quite a bit of academic research on transcranial alternating current, some with ours, but a lot using laboratory-based brain stimulation wearables, which don't look anything like what I just showed you. It doesn't look like this. A lab-based one will have electrodes all over the head, and then the research can selectively choose what electrodes to use. So it's not, those devices really aren't built for large-scale commercial like this design is. But in those studies, alternating current has been shown to induce synaptic plasticity, helping parts of the brain communicate with each other, find different pathways. This has been shown to be critical to all 3 conditions: depression, anxiety, insomnia. All tend to have communication and underactivity of the amygdala in the center brain. The other thing that we know that alternating current does, it entrains a brainwave state, neural oscillations, and that state will remain after you stop the stimulation. which explains why many patients will feel pretty much an immediate effect of coming into an alpha state, into a more relaxed state. But we believe that plasticity part of the mechanism is the most important in terms of long-term results. So it's kind of that long-term results with plasticity and that short-term feeling of anti-anxiety, if you will, with the brainwave state.
We have one thing, just for context, a question. Is this considered a therapeutic device?
Yes, it's a medical device, and I'll get to it right here.
Okay, good.
So we had temporary FDA clearance until April of this year. So when we originally started the business, we had what was called a grandfathered 510K, which is we were the last category of device to have that. And so we inherited when Chip and I started selling these in 2009. We could market the device for depression, anxiety, insomnia. At some point, the FDA was going to modernize the regulation and change it from what used to be under the grandfathered 510K substantial equivalence to pre-market approval for depression. So under substantial equivalence, you didn't have to do a clinical trial. You had to show that your device was equivalent to a device that was previously cleared, and that would go all the way back to the grandfathered devices that were in distribution before the FDA was regulating them in the 70s. In 2019, the FDA updated, we were the last category, really into a more modern form of medical device regulation, and required pre-market approval for these devices, and gave us some runway to continue to sell the old version, but we needed to invest in research and run a version for FDA approval. So during that time that we could use that old 510K, we sold 100,000 units through 14,000 providers. That obviously generated revenue. It built up a pretty enthusiastic customer base. We learned a tremendous amount of information from the doctors and the patients. We launched crowdfunding with our customers, and that's what's funded the R&D that we've done since 2019. So those years are really important, and has really gotten us to where we are today. So what we did from this stage, the old device, we built a new device that has fixed output. This older device had variable output, so someone could actually change how much electricity was being delivered. In the new device, it's a fixed level of stimulation, and therefore, doing a clinical trial, everyone's getting the same dose in the active arm. So after crowdfunding and raising money through primarily our customers, we've raised over $8 million through crowdfunding. We conducted a study that was completed this past December. It was acute treatment of moderate to severe depression, 255 subjects, triple blind, randomized, controlled. The control device was very similar to the active, except that it didn't have any stimulation. It functioned like, except there was no actual electricity coming from the electrodes. And the results of that were very strong. We had the active device significantly superior starting in week 1, and reducing depression symptoms by over 40% in the first week. And by week 4, we had statistical significance in the response rate between active and placebo. And there were no serious adverse events, no serious side effects. So if you don't have any serious side effects, the burden on showing benefit is technically not supposed to be as high as if you have many serious side effects, and you have to show that benefit outweighs that. Now, we did make one mistake in this study. We did not, and this may get a little technical, but we did not stratify the active and control arms by severity. And what ended up, that was The reason we didn't is because when we originally launched this study, it was only recruiting moderate depressed patients. And we made a decision to expand that to severe as well, because we weren't able to recruit patients fast enough to meet the FDA deadline if we were only recruiting moderate. Now, what we failed to do when we opened that up, and we went through the IRB to do that, is to make sure that we were getting equal numbers of severe in each arm. We didn't do that. Now, luckily, we had equal numbers of severe, depressed, and moderate among the female patients, which were 180 patients. The rest were male. And in that group, we had statistical separation at every time point with extremely low p-values. When you put the men in, we still had statistically significant separation at week 1 and at week 4 with the responder rate. But when you look at the groups, the control arm in the men did not beat active. And the reason for that is when you're a severe depression score is 4 times as wide of spectrum as moderate. And our primary outcome was the difference in depression scores. And so if you have a lot more severe depressed patients in the male arm than in the control arm than active, you're going to get a higher point drop with any kind of placebo response. So that's a little complicated, but the good news is that even with that kind of statistical handicap, we came out with 2 secondary endpoints and total home run in women and no serious adverse events. And so what we are anticipating is that we can get an FDA indication and a CE mark based on this study for women only, because that's where the data was clear. And I think we'll have an easier time with the CE mark, especially because there's no serious adverse events. It's in our view, it's impossible to really assert that the benefit doesn't outweigh the risk in this situation. But there's always regulatory risk, and we'll see. But this study was recently completed, and we're submitting the data to journal, and I can't wait for everyone can see more detail on this.
So you may get to this, but I'm just curious, what are the side effects, if at all?
So we had minor adverse events. Out of the 255, we had about 30. And it's headache, dizziness, some skin irritation under the electrodes. And in that commercial business of 100,000, we saw headache and dizziness in about 5% of the patients would report that. And, we sold devices when we were selling the version 1 directly to patients with a prescription that was done through telemedicine. So we had the relationship, so to speak, with the patient, the email, the phone. They would, patients would tell us if there was a problem. And so in the clinical trial, it was higher than 5%. It was around 14%, but that's also because you have the study investigators asking you every single day, "Oh, did you feel anything? Do you have any problem?" So people were, even just feeling a little irritation or itchiness from was counted as an adverse event. But headache and dizziness, and they're pretty. It's
minor, yeah. Compared to the disclosures that you see on the pharmaceutical television commercials.
Right. Yeah. Huge
internal bleeding, death. Right.
Right. I mean, it's funny, and it's not funny. I mean, we were very happy with not having serious adverse events, especially when you consider 2/3 of the subjects in this study were severely depressed at baseline. So we didn't have suicidal ideation, even in the control arm. That was probably a little bit lucky. But we didn't have a single one in serious adverse event. Yeah. This is a context. So the week 4 response rate, 65% inactive. That means 65% of the subjects improved their symptoms by at least 50%. So we cut their symptoms in half, by at least in half. in comparison, if you look at the TMS pivotal trial, 2008, 25% response rate using that same 50% or greater improvement. Oral antidepressants, this is a meta-analysis. I pulled this from, the oral antidepressants are not marketed to work quite that fast, but at week 4, 42%. Esketamine, which I mentioned, is the one medication that, along with oral antidepressants or alone, is fast acting. And there is a Johnson & Johnson study with esketamine and oral antidepressants with a 69% response rate by week 4, and ECT 71% in meta-analysis. So we're right up there with the most highest response rates, but and we're in the right side, the 3 that are fast acting, but we don't have the side effects. We're not expensive, and we're self-administered. So there is nothing right now that's approved that is fast acting, no serious side effects, inexpensive out of pocket, and self-administered. So that's, I think, part of the comparison I want to show here. We're running an anxiety study. We just finished it with Seattle Police Department. The last subject exited. This is generalized anxiety. 200 subjects. We should have the data analyzed, I'm hoping, by July. This was groundbreaking in a couple ways. I mean, this is the first time that I'm aware of any police department adopting wearable brain stimulation as an organization. And this is an 8-week trial. It's not placebo controlled. Seattle didn't want police using a fake device. So it's a waitlist controlled, which is standard for what's called real world evidence. And so we're going to use this study in support of an anxiety indication. So in addition to a depression indication, and also use it as a case study for working with organizations. Assuming the data is positive, we expect Seattle to buy some devices. We expect other police departments to quickly hear the news. This is the same kind of model for, whether you're a first responder organization or an investment bank or any job where the employer wants to take care of the employee's mental health with a hardware non-drug solution. So very excited about this. This is the regular.
Hey, Kelly.
Yeah.
Thank you. It might seem obvious. You knew somebody there, or they found out about you, but what was the fact pattern that compelled them to go ahead and give this a try? So
that was one of the benefits of running the legacy business. Lauren Adderley, who is head of Seattle Police Department's mental health and wellness and resiliency, is a customer of ours from about 4 years ago. And so when the chief of police kind of tasked him with doing some research on a solution to kind of help Seattle, like many police departments, had a high, especially during COVID, had a lot of officers quitting, retiring early, a lot of stress related incidents, and it's just a difficult place to work, both the day-to-day of the job, the media attention, everything. And so he reached out to us and said, would you be up for participating in a trial? And of course I said yes. And we've also brought in Nashville Police Department into this study, and then a group of other first responders, and 911 dispatchers are part of this study that work for Seattle. So it's
super interesting. Yeah. Talk about a stressful job, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Super cool.
Thank you. So I have this here. We have this 4-week depression trial that we finished in December. We have the anxiety trial that we're just finished and are getting data on. We have done some insomnia research during the pandemic. It was kind of plagued by the pandemic itself, but we did have 48 subjects that wore a sleep tracker for 4 weeks and showed 42-minute difference in total sleep time. So we have a reason to invest in a bigger insomnia study, but our goal really is to go after all 3 indications in the US and Europe. The depression study we have now may be able to get us approval here and in Europe, one or the other. I think more likely in Europe. I think we're going to have to do a longer study for the US. And this anxiety study you're doing with Seattle Police Department might be enough for us to get through Class 2 special controls for FDA. It's not as high a bar as an approval process for anxiety. It's FDA cleared, and we may have enough with this anxiety study to get through that. We could do a randomized control, one with a placebo arm would be the highest level. And insomnia, we do need a larger study to get an indication. 48 subjects is just isn't enough, although it's enough to give us confidence that we will have a good result in a large one. And so this is really dependent on our funding, and I'll get to that in a bit. We continue to do the crowdfunding. We're obviously here talking, and we're open to private markets. We've been a mostly crowdfunded company, and that kind of keeps us going and has allowed us to do this research to date. And I'm hoping that we can find more than, say the $200,000 to $500,000 a month that we've been able to bring in through crowdfunding. It would be nice to get a big check that we can do a bunch of things at once instead of incrementally, so we can accelerate getting to the market. But this is if we had the money to do 3 trials, or even if we just have money to do 1, we're going to first get what's called an FDA agreement meeting, where they have to actually, by law, they have to agree to the outcomes of an approval trial for a Class 3 device. And so if we can actually get them to commit to that, and should be able to get them to commit to that on anxiety and insomnia as well, because of the way that our device has changed from Class 3 into special controls. And before it's actually assigned the anxiety or insomnia, it's still technically Class 3. It's a little complicated, but I think we can get agreement from FDA on all 3 protocols. That would take the risk off the table as long as we execute them. And then the same data would be used for Europe. The protocol we did in this recent depression trial was done to the ISO standard, the protocol ISO standard, so that it would meet CE mark standard. So then towards the end of this year through April, we would do in 24, we would conduct those studies, 1, 2, or 3, depending on how much money we raise. The regulatory submissions could start as early as Q1 2024 for our recent study. We will have the ability to submit the study that did really well in women in Q1, and then the end of Q2, we would submit the results of these 12-week studies. And then the timeline for review, it can vary. The fastest we could get would be Q4 2024. The FDA clearance process for insomnia and anxiety is supposed to be about 128 days, and the CE mark can take 10, 11, 12 months. So if we're able to, if it's 10 months, we might get into Q4 with that first one. The FDA approval process will take longer. And so that's the window, Q4 2024, Q2 2025 on the to have up to 7 indications.
I may have missed this. Are you selling the device in the interim?
No, so that the legacy device, the temporary clearance ended in April.
Right, that's okay.
So, we knew it was coming. We just didn't know exactly when. So the FDA actually could have turned that off as early as 2021. So we're going to be crowdfunding at the very least, and getting So I guess our worst case scenario is we crowdfund. We don't raise enough through crowdfunding to do any new studies, but we can pursue indications with the study that we have. And then if we can raise, more than that, we can pursue more studies. So up to 7 shots at goal, from a regulatory perspective. And now I'll get into how we're turning the old form factor into a new form factor. So this is oak. This is oak in its carry case. This is it on the head. So a little more than a year ago, we were able to use crowdfunding money to hire the engineers and designers behind Nest and HoloLens and Beats. So Apple engineers essentially, and designers. And the goal is to build a device that is beautiful, that is a pleasure to use, doesn't have wires hanging down, that really brings the world-class form factor to meet the gravity and the world-class research that we've been trying to fulfill for FDA and CE mark. So this is again the same fixed output, fixed stimulation as the device that we used in our recent depression study and the Seattle Police Department study. It actually has the same contact materials, the same sponge material used for the electrode. And so it checks the boxes where it won't need to go through its own clinical trial. The output's the same, the contact material is the same, the control of it. I don't know if you can see here, depending on how well you can see, there's a button on the side that turns it on. There's a speaker that has a voice assistant if there's not enough moisture on the electrodes for conductivity. But this is a rechargeable lithium ion battery, Bluetoothed. We don't. If you're familiar with medical device regulation and you hear the word Bluetooth, that you may be, well, do you know about the software regulation? Yes, we do. We're not planning to build an app out the gate that is part of the device, but the device, we are planning to build an app, and I'll touch on this in a second. That's really more of a companion app, but doesn't have to be used with the device. So this device can be used without any phone on. This device can be used by itself, but we will have an app that tracks cognitive performance, symptoms, and provides talk therapy, as I mentioned here. So, we know from the 100,000 customers we had over version 1, a lot of people are interested in talk therapy, use talk therapy, and if we've already acquired the customer in an economic sense, then we can market to them without any additional acquisition costs. And so I think a lot of customers are going to want to track their own symptoms, want to see if their cognitive performance is improving. And then potentially a small portion of them may use our talk therapy, and that can be quite a significant revenue source.
Kelly, can I just
please.
make a comment back to the picture of the new device?
Yeah.
And I'm just pointing out the obvious, having had teenage girls and lived through that horror, they'd much rather wear this than the other thing. I mean, just
care
about what they look like, right?
And as I mentioned, teenage girls, highest prevalence of ER visits, suicidal ideation, highest prevalence of depression among any age group. The next highest is Gen Z. So we make this for everyone, but I want this to be a generational shift in depression treatment. And it looks like something Apple might build for a reason. That's what we're going for. Yep. And the industrial designers and I are kind of in love with the 7 different colors that this is one of them, but yellow, there's a coral. And then I talked to a guy at Microsoft who was in charge of HoloLens. He's like, you don't want to deal with the nightmare of all those SKUs, have gray, have black, we'll figure that part out. But I think the idea that even if we end up going down that route, this idea that you can choose the color of your depression treatment, and that's how I've been talking about it, there is something very compelling to that, and it's a totally different way of thinking about treatment. And so I kind of want to have at least one color or two colors. We'll figure that out, but that is important to me, and I think we can get a generational change here, especially with no serious side effects, rapid action. Those are the key things.
Yeah, cool.
So we've had one family office invest. Simon Webster, his outfit was called Shuffle Capital. It's fully deployed. It's like a venture fund that was all his money. Simon was CEO of CPA Global and merged it with Clarivate in a $6 billion deal, and has been investing in wellness with a mission to increase happiness. And $8.5 million from crowdfunding. We use the Start Engine platform. We've been doing that since 2019. We have a new campaign that's should be launched next week, if not Friday, but probably not tomorrow. I think it's gonna be next week. And then in conclusion, I'm happy to answer questions. I hope I haven't used too much time here. Looks like I've done I can talk. Let me just leave while there's time. Let me just turn it over to questions. I'm happy to answer any more.
That's okay. You're good. So let me go back to, does the technology work with OCD and bipolar disorders?
Bipolar, we actually have research on. So we did a small study at Mount Sinai Beth Israel with Igor Galenker, who runs the Family Bipolar Center. And to be transparent, there's only 12 subjects, but there was placebo and an active, and the active outperformed placebo with statistical significance. Even though it's 12 subjects, you can't draw conclusions from it, but it was effective. It was worked in the second week for bipolar 2 depression, and importantly, it didn't trigger any hypomania. SSRIs can trigger the manic side of bipolar, and that's why it's actually very difficult to treat with medication. And this did not do that in those 12 subjects. We went for a much broader population with major depressive disorder in the recent study, but OCD, we don't have research on. TMS, the competitor I told you about. I wouldn't like to have them be a competitor, but I think a lot of people think of us as competitors. They do have a obsessive compulsive disorder indication. It's within our scope. It's just we have to pick our lanes right now, and we're not there yet. Alzheimer's is a huge potential indication. I am talking with a foundation and an Alzheimer's research to get some research going. That's just going to be a long lead time thing.
I think this is back to a technical question. Curious why such a long GTM given age of your company? Barriers that's go to market.
Oh,
yeah.
So, well, the first 10 years were really spent. I mean, I'd never worked in the medical device business. Chip had never either. To give you a quick synopsis, we got in there without knowing anything in 2009. In 2011, the FDA called for approval for all indications. We then went through a multi-year, the euphemism would be negotiation with the FDA, where by 2019, they finally, instead of requiring a class 3 for all three, they only required class 3 for one, the depression indication. And during that time, we were allowed to market. So this story could have been over in 2012 because we did not have the expertise or the means to fund approval studies in 2011. But we did have the, I guess, tenacity and some good counsel with Sidley and Phil Phillips to basically have this choreography over many years with the FDA to get them to a point where then by that point in 2019, we did have the ability to raise the money for the studies. We did have a lot of experience. I mean, I didn't know anything about manufacturing when I started. I didn't know anything about the FDA. It really couldn't have been greener. And so I'm glad, this is not a software startup. I didn't code something that I can go. I mean, this was a huge learning process. I'd say we kind of started being a startup in 2019 in a way, and the rest of it was learning.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So is it fair to say, based on what you've said, that this is safer, more effective, non-addictive, not going to be, taking Ambien for 10 years? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, but is it fair to say that?
The science, part of me says I'm not going to make a claim unless there's a head-to-head study. I would like to, in a perfect world, have a third arm in our next depression study that is active medication. I would bet you that our placebo arm beats active medication. And why is that? There's two parts to our treatment. There's the stimulation itself, the electrical stimulation. There's also the behavior change, which is 20 minutes twice a day, 40 minutes a day. 88% of the patients in our depression trial were still doing it twice a day by week 2, 77% by week 4. That's a huge behavior change of self-care routine. And the placebo, there was a clinical impact of that. Just like in cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a clinical impact to positive, consistent behavior change. So it's the two things. And so when I compare us to TMS, I will say to people, I'm not going to tell you our stimulation itself is better than TMS, but the user behavior is way more impactful than the going to the dentist experience of TMS. And creating that habit has a lot of downstream impacts. We didn't track how did people, did they drink less? Did they, what other things did they do during the time they're using our device? But so yes, I would say yes, it certainly is. I would give this to my daughter who's 9 before drugs. My wife used this while she was pregnant. Those are the situations that you care about the most, right?
So I don't know how this works. Is any of the other devices that are used to treat depression, for example, the competitors that you showed, the 2 expensive ones and drugs, are they considered curative devices? And I didn't make up that question.
I've never used the word cure. I think there is remission where people go from severe, moderate, all the way down to minimal to none. And we certainly have that. I mean, it's in our study. I always kind of chuckle a little bit when people talk about remission in an 8 or 12-week study. I mean, ours is only 6 weeks, including the lead-in. You need to show years, right, to be able to say if something's really in remission. But we get people down to minimal to none, and stay there. And when we surveyed our customers, we asked them, "Do you intend to use the device for the rest of your life?" 77% said yes, rest of their life, every day, because they don't want to lose the effects that they feel. And it's not just the absence of depression, it's the cognitive improvements. If you're improving plasticity, you are almost by definition improving cognition. And that's why people are also continuing to use it even when they're in remission.
Do you have any endorsements by National Mental Health Association, that sort of thing, or do they need FDA approval before you do that?
We have, New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation approved it to be prescribed. The only problem is that we don't have Medicaid coverage in New York. So, it's approved there, but, the patients aren't going to buy it. We do want to ultimately get Medicaid coverage for people who can't afford $300, $400, $500 out of pocket. We can have a very healthy business without insurance, but we do have New York City Health and Hospitals. Phoenix House has used it. We actually did a study with Phoenix House that showed a tremendous improvement in, or rather a reduction in the dropout rate from rehab. So they had a retention problem where, people would check into rehab and then they drop out. And people who had our device from the day one that they checked in, 50% higher rate of retention. So yeah, I'd say there's more organizational. We have, we've been covered in Forbes. We were named one of 4 technologies innovating health. Entrepreneur magazine said one of 5 health tech startups to watch. We've had, but you're to your point. Some of the mental health organizations, they don't want to be like product specific.
Yeah, it makes sense. So before we jump, can we just go over the ask again?
Yeah, I'll put it this way. There's kind of 3 different paths, right? We have crowdfunding, which is not what I'm here for. We have what could be a combination of crowdfunding for a while, then a private round that say would be in the $5 million range, and then we do a larger round later. Or we could do a large round. Our crowdfunding hasn't launched yet, but we could do, say, up to an $18 million Series A, which would allow us to do everything that I discussed, 3 new studies, be super aggressive with commercialization. But with crowdfunding and $5 million, we can commercialize Oak with at least with a new depression study. So there's a bit of a Chinese menu, depending on if we do 1 or 3 studies, and so depending on people's appetites and interests, I can have those conversations.
Great, perfect. So I like the optics of the device. I don't mind telling you, I think it has a serious impact of whether people will use it, because if it looks like an ace bandage around your head, people are going to what the hell's the matter with me, right?
Yeah, it looks like we're charging a battery in our first one. Yeah.
Sort of sci-fi like. It's nice.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Eric Fields, industrial designer. Yeah.
So with that, we're going to wrap things up. We'll make sure everybody gets in touch with Kelly. There's his information if you want to scribble it down. But we'll be sure to connect you directly. And then we're going to do this again in a week or so. So if there's anybody that after having seen this, you care to include, just let us know and we'll make that happen. And again, thank you, Jason, for arranging this. Super cool. I know, just not personally, but through multiple rounds of being an investor in various things, that the slog of the FDA is frustrating at best, but good for you for running through that wall. Yeah. So thank you.
I'm a pain sponge, as they say in Succession, a pain sponge.
Yeah, pain sponge. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. The finale was interesting. Yeah. Lots of cool stuff there.
It's a pleasure to be here, Arthur. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And thank you, everybody. As I always say, thank you for sharing with us. The only thing you can't make more of, and that's your time. Till next time. Thank you, Kelly. Okay.
Thanks a lot.